1938. Within a year of his birth, his parents split up. It was the start of a severely disrupted childhood. In all, he went to 13 schools and sunk to the bottom of the class at every one. He left school an O-level dropout and was drafted into national service. On his return to Civvy Street in 1958, Reed and his elder brother David went looking for work. Reed moved into film extra work. Acting was in his blood. His uncle, Sir Carroll Reed, was a famous film director, and his grandfather had founded the drama school RADA. But Reed had no time for formal training. Instead, he used a variation on the casting couch. Reed's first speaking part was in a 1960 comedy thriller. It was a surprising role and an unconvincing performance for a man later notorious for his views on what he called buffdas. Soon, bit parts turned into starring roles, albeit as monsters for Hammer Horror. Reed specialized in grunting and looking threatening. When he wasn't covered in hair, Reed had the right face at the right time. The late 50s and 60s saw an explosion in the youth market. Young people had money to spend and wanted films which reflected their generation. In 1964, a young director was looking for a star for his film The System, a tale of sexual promiscuity by the seaside. He saw in Reed the perfect combination of sex and danger to play the leading role. Michael Winner used Reed's screen magnetism right at the top of the film. At the beginning of his career, Reed seemed able to keep drinking and work separate. Seemingly immune from hangovers, he was never late on set, and he always knew his lines. Nonetheless, it was a drunken incident that nearly ruined his career in 1964. One night in April, Reed was attacked in the Crazy Elephant nightclub in London's West End.
Girl, I want to be with you all of the time.
Trouble began when Reed got into a war of words with a group of men at the bar. He ended up telling them to go play with themselves. The gashes on the side of Reed's face needed 36 stitches. It put his career in jeopardy. He was turned down for a succession of lead roles. Then, out of the blue, Reed was called for an audition for the role of composer Debussy for a prestigious BBC arts series. On the success of Debussy, Reed's career took off. The world was his oyster, but he chose Wimbledon. This respectable suburb of London had been his boyhood home. Here, Reed attempted to create a sense of security that he'd never known as a child by surrounding himself with friends and family. In 1959, he'd fallen for a model, Kate Byrne. Within a year, they married and they had a son. By the end of the 1960s, Reed was a household name with films like Oliver, The Jokers, and Hannibal Brooks behind him. And when he hit the big time, he insisted that friends like Dobbo shared the high life with him. He had made cinema history by being Britain's first full-frontal male nude in Ken Russell's film Women in Love. Reed performed the build-up to the wrestling scene as if he relished the idea of a naked grapple. In fact, he and Bates were both extremely reluctant. The problem was male pride. The issue was whose penis was the biggest, and that was only resolved in the pub the night before filming. The gusto with which they threw themselves into their naked wrestling belied their initial reluctance and helped to create one of British cinema's most memorable scenes. By 1969, Reed's marriage was on the rocks, not because of his drinking, but because of another woman. He'd started an affair with a dancer, Jackie Darrell, who he'd met on a film set. When she became pregnant, he secretly installed her in a flat. It did not remain secret for long. In the early 70s, when Reed appeared on Parkinson, he was at the pinnacle of his career.
He is a gothic hero in the living, lusting flesh. He smoulders a mobile furnace.
In those days, Reed was an impeccable chat show guest. Reed chose chose Jackie. 2 years later, in 1971, they moved, with their daughter Sarah, to the country. His work with Ken Russell had brought critical acclaim. Tough man action roles brought him millionaire status, and a house to match. Broom Hall in Surrey was a Victorian country house with 50 acres of land. It cost him £85,000, a fortune then, and it was virtually derelict. The new Lord and Lady of Broom Hall set to work renovating their stately home, supervising up to 30 workmen paid full-time for years. As often as not, Reed ordered them to down tools in order to down drinks. The most legendary drinking session was the visit paid by 45 rugby players on a stag night. The party downed 32 bottles of scotch, 17 of gin, and 50 gallons of beer. Reed, who by now had developed a taste for showing off his tackle, led the boys in a bollock-naked striptease. But somehow, despite the constant drinking, work got done. Reed insisted that the place was restored in perfect period detail. It took 8 years and cost a fortune. But his real pride and joy was the garden, which he and Dobbo restored to its full Victorian glory. By the time he made The Three Musketeers in 1973, Hollywood producers were offering Reed plum roles in films like Jaws and The Sting. By the time Valerie Singleton paid Reed a visit, Broom Hall had become a millstone around his neck. To pay for its upkeep, he was taking virtually any part going, most of them instantly forgettable. Towards the end of the 70s, Reed's long-term partner Jackie Darrell found life in Broom Hall increasingly difficult to cope with. Reed sold Broom Hall within a month of Jackie Darrell leaving. His contemporaries Sean Connery and Michael Caine had already made the move to America, but Reed, the biggest fish in Britain, wouldn't cross the pond. In 1986, Reed bought a home in Guernsey, where he and Josephine spent 6 months a year for the rest of the decade to avoid tax. As his film career stalled and his ambition waned, Reed's drinking became heavier. Close friends knew what to expect. In his 1979 autobiography, he wrote, "I like women in their place. I like them on their knees in the kitchen. In return, I feed them, wine them, make them laugh, and give them a punch on the nose when they need it." He wasn't entirely joking. But his career as a hellraiser really took off. Boozing, brawling, and his personal speciality, trouser dropping to reveal what he called his mighty mallet. In 1991, Reed appeared on Channel 4's open-ended intellectual forum to give his perspective on male violence. He was drinking from the outset.
The ultimate thing is...
The discussion turned to women's motivation for abortions. Reed became increasingly aggressive and incoherent.
No bullshit, it's all down to whether or not she wants to get shafted.
In 1993, Oliver and Josephine moved to the south coast of Ireland, and life appeared to take on a different pace as Reed passed 50. For the last few years, Reed had barely worked when top Hollywood director Ridley Scott called out of the blue. He wanted Reed to come to Malta to play a fading strongman in his new film Gladiator. Reed took the job and, typically, found the most English bar on the island, a pub called, well, The Pub. On Sunday, May the 2nd, he had the day off filming. He was relaxing in the pub with his wife and visiting sailors. Reed was in high spirits. He'd started drinking at 10 and, according to one account, by 2 o'clock he had drunk 12 double shots of rum, 8 bottles of lager and half a bottle of whiskey. He'd also been arm wrestling taken on and beaten a number of challenges. But the strain on his heart proved too much. Reed was brought back to Ireland for the funeral. Few celebrities turned up, but thousands of ordinary people came to pay their respects.